Now, 1 in 5 children are victims of sexual abuse in South Africa. This represents 19.8% compared to a global average of 18% for girls and 8% for boys. In the 2019-2020 annual crime statistics report, more than 24,000 children were sexually assaulted in South Africa. Statistics are not readily available for schools, and there's a great deal of underreporting, but it's estimated that 22.2% of school children have been victims of violence. Well, to speak to us about how basic education can be an opportunity to teach teachers, young girls and boys about issues of sexuality, we're joined by Professor of Gender and Childhood Sexuality at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Deevia Bhana. Deevia, good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. Firstly, you know, the rates of sexual violence against children in this country are quite high, and I imagine that beyond just teaching, there are numerous roles that a schooling environment can play as an intervention in that space.
Yes, correct, and that's exactly what we're here at the university are trying to establish. What might those particular points of intervention be that may address the scourge or the sort of the heinous crimes that continue to make life very difficult for women and girls in this country.
And what are some of the immediate areas that you've been able to identify?
So I think this is really a multi-pronged approach to interventions, and it starts in the family, it starts with parents. The school is not separate from the broader community in which young learners are placed. So if we could start with parents, start early, start young, change the sort of ideologies that increase the propensity for boys in particular to do violence, then that might be one very simple but important step in the right direction. But parents are not the only targets in terms of intervention strategies. We need the media, we need the communities, we need religious institutions, and we need the state to support these initiatives.
Of course, part of the reasons why schools become so important is because we've seen this often, where children who are facing abuse in their homes are first, the first point where that is sometimes identified is in school and by teachers, and the home is not always a safe space for these children to actually raise part of what is happening to them, because those that are supposed to be their guardians are perpetrators of some of this abuse.
Exactly, and here then comes in the teachers and the very critical role they play. You must remember that in our country, oftentimes the school is the only formal structure and ground zero for young people. And of course, the school is the only support mechanism in terms of reporting and disclosing sexual violence. And so teachers must be readily able to address the disclosures, act on it, so that the perpetrators do not get away, and that also supportive environments for both boys and girls, because sexual violence is not simply a case of girls only, although the reporting amongst boys is even lower. So teachers need to be prepared to address this. In fact, it is mandatory for any adult to report a case of sexual violence when it is uncovered to the police.
Let's talk about the ways in which schools can be a better learning environment in terms of even challenging the status quo that we have in society, and really beginning early in terms of gender education, so that we are breaking some of these systems that have perpetuated violence against men and against women.
So I guess it will start with a comprehensive sexuality education. Now that's where we have a whole lot of debate, because as you may recall, in late 2019, early 2020, there was a great furore about the the Department of Basic Education instituting a new curriculum called Comprehensive Sexuality Education. And I would argue that the problem is that when you have such resistance, you also then deny children the opportunity to develop and grow, as well as to say a simple word like sex. So if we start early and permit children in schools to say the word sex, so that this word itself becomes normalized instead of being hidden and part of an underground culture, then maybe children will feel comfortable enough to talk to adult teachers about that which bothers them. And in many instances, it could be issues around sexual violence.
You know, we've just had the Minister of Basic Education, as far as this past week, talking about the need to actually go back and review that policy on comprehensive sexual education. Why do you think there is such strong backlash against it when we all sit with the figures, whether it's gender-based violence, whether it's teenage pregnancies, that tell us that a lot more education needs to be going into our young people?
So we have this conflicting environment. Academic research has shown the value of comprehensive sexuality education, not only in this country, but across the globe. On the other end, we have a huge resistance towards associating children and young people even with the word sex, because this is seen as culturally and religiously non-normative. But the sad truth is that if we try something different, if we give comprehensive sexuality education an opportunity, then perhaps we may have a different outcome than the outcome that we currently have in this country. The resistance is clear. Adults do not wish for their children to be seen, of course this is their wish, to be sexual or to be interested in sexuality. And this is certainly a mythical wish, because children and young people, whether they're 6 or 18, have a great deal of knowledge about sex and sexuality, and that knowledge is not formally achieved, but it's informally gained through the internet, through mobile technologies. And if we give young people an opportunity to support them in the kinds of knowledge that we think are necessary to end the sort of ideologies that increase the propensity towards violence, then perhaps that might be a really good intervention.
And the concerns largely expressed not just by parents, and we've seen this with other organizations before, civil society organizations, that comprehensive sexual education will be awakening something in children and therefore encouraging early sexual behavior.
Again, research has across the globe indicated how false this is. The idea that you are awakening some hidden form of sexuality, or that sexuality suddenly pops up at age 18 or 16 at the age of consent, is certainly an incorrect analysis of what children think, feel, and know. My own research has found that even at the age of 6, there are vested interests in boyfriend and girlfriend cultures. Already, when children come to school, they have developed norms around, masculinities and femininities. And underpinning all of this is notions of power. And it's not simply about power against, softer and weaker girls, but it is also power against other boys or softer boys. So the idea that that sexuality is suddenly pops up at some particular age in one's life discounts the fact that sexuality, like gender, is a lifelong project.
So, Professor Bhana, what is the work that can be done to get greater buy-in on the part of parents and guardians who in many ways themselves could well be avoiding these conversations because they don't want to be asked, because they themselves could well be at a place where they're either embarrassed or not really in a position where they're comfortable to speak to their children and address whatever concerns or whatever questions that they may have.
You say it so well. We have a case where parents and adults find it difficult to address controversial and sensitive issues such as sex and sexuality. The strategies used here would be, culturally this is insensitive, or religiously this is not within, the religious norms. But the question that I ask is, what's more important? Is it more important to ensure that you safeguard children from your own embarrassment? Or is it more important to alert children to understanding sex and sexuality in its widest form, both for pleasure as well as for educational purposes, as well as the danger that lurks, especially in certain areas of this country?
Professor Deevia Bhana, let me thank you so much for your time tonight. And she is with the University of KwaZulu-Natal.